Hey, everybody, and thank you so much again for taking the time out of your day to join me for another episode of Me and All My Friends. I'm really delighted today to have my really good friend Diana Ladio joining me on Me and All My Friends. Diana is a fiddle player, she's a songwriter, she's a music producer, a blogger, an educator. She's originally from a little place called Ann Arbor in Michigan. She is currently residing in Nashville, Tennessee, but she's joining me today from Springfield, Missouri, which is pretty awesome. She's a touring musician who's traveled extensively around the US. She's deeply integrated into the Celtic music scene over in the US, performing with bands like the Elders and the Moxie Strings over the past few years. She's also currently working on a brand new solo project, which she started over this whole COVID-19 pandemic. Uh, she's running her own music education nonprofit organization called the Mox Project. If you want to go and check that out, you can go to the moxproject.org. And if you want to just check out on all the things that she's actually up to, because she's up to any number of different things all at the one time, you can head over to her website at dianaladio.com or check out her blog at drift.com, which is spelled DRRIIFT.com. Diana, hopefully that's a wonderful enough introduction for you. It's hard to fit all the things in that you actually do in your life, but I'm delighted to have you on. Such a pleasure to have you here on Me and All My Friends.
Oh, thanks, Warren. I know. I'm going down the list like, yeah, well, yeah, that too. Okay, yeah.
I do all those
But
things.
you've got a lot of ideas. You can relate.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't even really know, quite honestly, where to start this interview. Uh,
Fair enough.
but the one thing that I'm really curious to know, and I think the perfect place probably to kick off with, is how does a girl from Ann Arbor in Michigan wind up playing Irish traditional or Celtic music?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. Well, I was very lucky to have a program as part of my school system that it kind of gave me the bug. It just introduced me to the fact that it was out there and possible. So I'm classically trained. I One of the things I love to be able to tell the students I work with is my background in music is nothing particularly special. I chose to play the violin in fifth grade in my public school orchestra program. So there was no like playing fiddle in the house or, having musicians for, well connected parents or anything like that. And so it was pretty traditional up until that point. I will say the program that I came from is really special and awesome and really great teaching. But in high school, there was an extracurricular group which was very ahead of its time, and it was called the Chelsea House Orchestra. And it was a bunch of us orchestra kids would get together and play fiddle tunes. And then we would go like play some festivals on the weekends, and that was really pivotal for me now looking back because it not only kind of told me that there was more that you can do on your string instrument than just play orchestral music and sit in an orchestra and play, Western classical music. But it also taught me that actually being standing on stage and smiling and making eye contact and having that more connective performance piece was really important to me. And as soon as I learned that, the idea of sitting in an orchestra was part of it, but it wasn't going to be everything for me. And so this particular group was kind of focused on the Celtic world. And so the teacher that was directing us would just bring us tons of recordings and would send us to these different shows, and we just would be listening to it all the time and trying to figure out exactly how those Irish trills happen. And went to college for music, but that was for viola, which is slightly different, like the lower brother of the violin. And
Mm-hmm.
so I always just kind of kept the violin as like my fiddle, and that's where I did all of the like non-classical stuff. And um, went to some fiddle camps and started learning from some other players and listened to a lot of traditional players and went to their concerts whenever I could. And it's just a really amazing community, as you know. And especially when I met my bandmate and we decided to start our project, the Moxie Strings, I called on my limited knowledge but excitement for Irish and Celtic music. And um, yeah, it was such a natural place to start because there's such an affinity for it here in the United States. It's kind of like the perfect platform to launch a band in a lot of ways too, because there's always an Irish pub, and fiddle in particular, people just really light up for it. They just love the instrument, and it's really cool that way. And then the Irish festivals, and holidays and that kind of thing. And it kind of allows a really cool platform to get something going. And we were really into it. So rest is history.
I always find it really fascinating because I've traveled to the US, as you know, quite a bit over the past 10 years. I find it really fascinating at how excited American people generally are about Irish culture and, in particular, Irish music. And quite honestly, I feel like I take it for granted, and I feel like probably most people here take it for granted. People who are originally from Ireland, we have no understanding of just how important Irish culture and Irish music is outside of the island of Ireland. And
Mm-hmm.
I still don't understand it, even though I've traveled and I've met a ton of people in the US.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that people just love getting the opportunity to talk to me and to talk to me specifically about Ireland, not even about myself, even though I am a horribly interesting person to talk to.
They're like, we can't get past the accent.
No, they
We just
can't.
want to.
They can't deal. They just want to know all about Ireland and how green it is and how good the Guinness tastes and all of that stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, like, as somebody who performs in an Irish American band, I don't even know like the correct term for it, but as somebody who performs in the Celtic scene over there, do you feel like you get the same treatment as Irish people that perform in the Irish music circuit over there?
That's a great question. And no, I agree that I agree that there is
Rightly so, because
such
it's
an
cultural
affinity.
appropriation.
We don't claim to be traditional in any way. I will say that.
Yeah,
Although you will hear the occasional Irish band who you'll hear like the traces of an attempt at an Irish accent into the mic, an American band.
yeah,
Mm-mm.
yeah.
That's frowned
No go.
upon all across the board, just so
No
you know.
go.
But yeah, no, the the affinity here, and I think it's partly because there's a lot of Irish heritage here. I mean, you guys really sowed your oats in the United States,
Yeah.
like just
I
about
think
everybody
I
here
think we've
has a
probably
little
so
trace of it.
I think we've probably sowed our oats everywhere in the world, quite
I
honestly, from as
know.
much as I can tell.
But it's so cool. It's like this coveted culture. It really is. So people are doing their ancestry and they get so excited that they have, 5% Irish something something. And yeah, there's so many Irish last names over here, although we pronounce them probably what you would call incorrectly. But it's just, and I don't know, it's such a welcoming and friendly and just like fun driven community. It's all about community and togetherness. And I think that plus the music being, I mean, the music tunes just make you feel good, and the songs have such history and tell such stories. And it's hard for me to find a a comparable genre that has the same effect over here. And because I think Irish history is so recent in so many ways, like relatively speaking, these are very current issues still. And within the last couple of centuries that it's come such a long way, and so much has happened and so many songs are written about it. And I don't
Yeah,
know, it just has all the pieces that people can really relate to. And it's the underdog story too. It's just got everything that
yeah,
I think people get really excited about. Yeah. And we do have to be very careful not to call ourselves traditional Irish bands. And both of my bands have those influences, and especially because I've taken the time. I don't claim to be a traditional Irish fiddle player. I don't have like the repertoire. I didn't grow up playing the tunes. I don't speak the language fluently. But I have taken the time to really take apart the trills and the rhythms and the bow patterns and that kind of thing to really try to sound as authentic as possible with total respect to the genre, because I think it's worth it if you're going to say that you have those influences. Um, but yeah, we're careful not to call it traditional by any means, because it is such a rich culture and people spend so many hours devoting themselves to it. I don't think it would be particularly respectful to do that. So the elders kind of call themselves Celtic rock, and it's all original music, but our lead singer is Irish, so the tunes always tend to have kind of that lilt, and they always have a fiddle hook, and then you've got his accent kind of coming through. And
the token
um,
Irishman,
I
essential
know
essential to any American Irish band.
it really is, and that's why you've got people faking the accent sometimes, and you're like, no, please.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got to have it. Warren, you've got a serious future if you want to be the front man of an American Irish band.
Well, we're going to make it happen, Diana. We're
I
already
know.
in talks.
I
We're
know.
in deep talks about making this happen.
I called
Uh,
dibs already.
Tell me this.
Yeah.
Within your musical career, when was the first time that you actually came to Ireland? Did you come to Ireland? Did you ever get the opportunity to visit Ireland before you started playing traditional music,
No.
or interesting?
No. It was all listening and watching videos, and anytime an Irish player would come over here, we would flock and we would drive to be able to see them. And so it was just immersing myself in the sounds as much as possible. And I was I was so eager to get over here to the point after college. I mean, I was looking up any opportunity, just maybe looking to travel over, and I just like the opportunity wasn't presenting itself. And in a series of very fateful events in my life, and taking some risks and clearing some space, the elders called, and I was originally just going to go over. They do an Irish tour every fall, and I knew that. So the elders called and asked me to, start working my way into like replacing their current fiddle player. And I was going to go over to Ireland with them just to study his parts, and it ended up being that I went over as their full-time fiddle player. So it was trial by fire for sure, to be very, very new to the band and then be dropped in with all Irish audiences.
How did you find? I'm really curious because obviously I've been exposed to some of the Irish traditional music that exists within the US, and a lot of
Yeah.
the time I find that people that kind of brand themselves as Irish traditional bands tend to fall into that kind of flogging Molly category of what I would nearly describe as like Irish punk music almost.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a mishmash between the Irish punk scene that existed back in the 70s in the north of Ireland and
Mm-hmm.
Irish traditional music, which seems like a really strange combination in my mind, but for some reason it seems to work and people seem to love it. What was your experience like whenever you actually got to come to Ireland for the first time and experience what real Irish traditional music was actually on the island itself? Can you describe or can you remember what it felt like, or how it compared with what you were familiar with living in the US or growing up in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because I had done the research and taken the time to understand like where the tunes and where kind of the acoustic sessions and Irish sessions fit in the Irish community, which is like the bulk of it. That's where the tunes and the songs happen, is in the pubs. Um, I knew to make the distinction, but I think that probably the majority of the people in the United States, it's all Irish music to them, and they, yes, if you said Irish music, Flogging Molly and Dropkick Murphys would probably be the two that came to mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I think I'd be curious to know how Irish people felt about those bands, because I agree that in your history, they are completely different. Like, you've got acoustic tunes and sessions going back hundreds and hundreds of years, and then you've got these punk bands that are relatively new, like these Celtic rock bands. But Irish festivals here in the United States in particular, I think, try to do a mix and try to kind of Irish music through the ages. And but I haven't, now that you say that, I'm not sure I've really known any of those like heavier actually Irish rock bands to come from Ireland over to the festivals. That's very much an Americanized thing. And I can think of some great rock bands that came from Ireland, but not that necessarily play anything to do with Irish traditional music.
I'm going to make what might be quite an embarrassing admission here, right?
Please.
The first time that I visited the US was back in, I think it was 2011. And I was playing with what was kind of primarily a wedding band, but also started out really life as an Irish traditional folk band. And when I joined the band, they had the opportunity to go over to the US to play at the Stone Mountain Highland Games in Atlanta, Georgia. They had been there, I think, a few times, maybe 2 or 3 times before I joined the band. And when I joined with them and started playing the wedding circuit and stuff here in Ireland with them, we ended up going over to the US to perform at this festival at the Stone Mountain Highland Games, which is actually a Scottish festival. It's not even an Irish festival, but for some reason they loved having Irish bands there. And a lot of the bands that were actually playing were that kind of like Celtic rock that you see so much of in the US. Uh, I remember going over there for the first time, and I grew up in a Protestant family here in Ireland. My family are Protestants and they have Scottish heritage and whatever. I think it's a mixture of Scottish and English heritage that's actually on my both of my grandparents' side. But uh, it's interesting because here in Ireland, having grown up in the Protestant community here, and particularly in the north of Ireland, where Ulster Scots is probably almost just as prominent as kind of Irish Gaelic culture is here, I wasn't really familiar with Irish traditional music at all. I hadn't ever really been exposed to Irish traditional music all that much. I wasn't familiar with tunes uh, up until the point when I started playing with this trad band. I went to the US, and I'm almost certain it was the very first year that I went to perform at this festival that somebody came up to me and mentioned Flogging Molly and the Dropkick Murphys and how awesome Flogging Molly were and how awesome the Dropkick Murphys were. And I was like, I have no fucking clue who you're talking about. I literally do not have a notion. And probably up until, I want to say up until 6 months or a year ago, I had never heard a Flogging Molly song. I had never heard a Dropkick Murphy song. At least knowingly, I had never heard either of those bands. And yet you go to the US, and in the countless times that I've been to the US now since, I've probably been over traveling around the US 15 to 20 times since then. Almost every time that I go, somebody mentions the Dropkick Murphys or Flogging Molly to me. They are huge in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable. And I literally had no clue who they were. Having lived in Ireland for what, 32 years of life now, 32 years of existence, and I had no familiarity with them. And yet
That's so interesting.
they're literally the biggest. I think that I'm right in saying that they are literally the biggest Irish traditional bands in the United States.
Yeah. I don't know if we'd call them Irish traditional bands, but with the limited knowledge of Irish music that a lot of Americans have, that is what they think of. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it would fit in the narrative in terms of like what a lot of like the types of genres that are most popular here in the States. It would be kind of the combination of something heavier and rock mixed with like, a pipe or a whistle or pipes or a whistle or a fiddle, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's usually those melody lines that make it sound something more than just a rock band, And
Yeah.
like we said, maybe an accent tossed in there some as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting, and I think people know about. It's so funny too because I'll play something that I don't even think sounds Irish, but because people have such limited knowledge of what a like traditional Irish tune sounds like, I'll be playing like a bluegrass tune and they'll be like, "Oh, we should dance a jig to this," and I'm going, "Okay, yeah." It just really shows that there is definitely a limited knowledge of it, and I don't know. There's been a cool thing happening at the Irish festivals recently, where in the last couple of years, where a couple of them have done um, like Irish cover. It was a whole set of all the bands doing covers of Irish tunes like throughout the ages. And I remember a lot of people in the audience being like, I didn't know this band was Irish. I mean, it was the Cranberries, it was obviously the Pogues, it was Van Morrison, it was, I don't know, I'm blanking on some of the others.
Paul Brady,
But it
Snow
was
Patrol.
actually none of the more current ones. They should
Oh,
have.
well,
I know, I
Paul
totally
Brady's not
agree.
current. Paul Brady's been around for decades, but
Oh, you said Paul Brady? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. There was probably a Paul Brady song. Glenn Hansard. I mean, it was really, really cool. And I think it was a way of making the statement to people too. Like we have a lot of musical heritage to thank in terms of the bands that we love in the United States that come from Ireland. And for being such a small country, you guys, and we've talked about this, like the amount of arts and like just beauty and creativity that come out of this one little small island is pretty remarkable. And just kind of getting to see like mingle with the different trad players that come from over there that have been playing in pubs since they were kids, and now they are creating kind of these cool hybrid. They have all the trad influences, but they're also mixing electronics and new age sounds, and it's just so cool to see how like our age bracket would be taking the tunes that they grew up playing with their parents and grandparents, and it's got this really new spin. And I mean, some of my favorite bands are this cool combination of old school meets new school. So
It's funny there how you're talking about people having like a limited musical knowledge, and they could hear you playing something and mistake it for being Irish traditional or maybe Scottish traditional or whatever. I have quite a funny story about that, where, as I said, having grown up in the Protestant side of the community here in the north of Ireland, we've had a pretty troubled past, as I'm sure you're probably aware, and probably many of the people that are going to watch this or have some kind of awareness of the troubles that went on in the north of Ireland and throughout the island of Ireland. In recent years, it's been pretty good. For the past 20 years, it's been pretty peaceful, and that's an awesome thing, and it's a thing that I hope continues for a long time. But there still is like some degree of tension and some degree of a divide that still exists here. And one thing, whenever they signed the Good Friday Agreement, which basically meant that all the terrorists here were going to give up their guns and they were going to stop shooting each other and blowing each other up and all that stuff. When they finally made that political agreement, they started implementing these things at a government level where they would give grant funding to groups who were trying to integrate the Protestant and Catholic communities back together again. Now, this is probably like 6 or 8 years ago. A friend from the trad band that I was playing with at the time got in touch with me, and he said that some program had got in touch with him about joining this cross community venture that was trying to bring together musicians from an Irish trad background and more of like a Scottish trad, Ulster Scots kind of background, which we kind of bridged the gap between those two things. We would play a lot of Ulster Scots music, but we would also play a lot of the Irish trad music. And he got invited to this event, and he said, "You want to come down? It's actually going to be happening at the Fla." So the Fla, for anyone who isn't familiar, is just a big event that runs, I think, once a year, where they get a bunch of the best trad players throughout the country together. They get a bunch of trad bands. They have huge live stages. People meet up and they just have sessions in pubs throughout the little town that they take over for the week or weekend or whatever it is. And he said, they're going to do this event, and we're basically going to get together with a bunch of trad players, learn a load of tunes, and we're going to be playing a mixture of like Ulster Scots stuff and traditional stuff, Irish traditional stuff. And we're going to come together and perform at a live event at the Fla. And they're going to give us like accommodation and stuff for the weekend, and we're going to get to go and hang out and have fun and whatever. So I was like, cool, that sounds like fun. So we ended up getting together, and I think it was during one of the rehearsals, they would like get us together for rehearsals, and they would put on like lunch or whatever it was over 6 or 8 hour day where you were sitting practicing for this event. And we sat down to lunch on like the last day of rehearsals that we had. And one of the girls that was organizing the event turned around and she said, "Guys, I'm really sorry to have to do this, but because this is a government funded program and because it's this cross community thing, we've got to ask a few questions of you. And so we're just curious, like, obviously a lot of you guys, or some of you guys, are from like an Ulster Scots background. Some of you are from an Irish traditional background. And we're just curious to know, like, you're playing some Ulster Scots tunes here, you're playing some Irish traditional tunes here. Are there any similarities or differences that you can hear between the two kinds of tunes?" So everyone was kind of sitting around. It was a group of maybe, I don't know, 15 to 20 people sitting around, and nobody would answer. So I put up my hand and I said, "I'm going to be perfectly honest. I haven't been exposed to an awful lot of traditional music throughout the course of my life. I'm pretty new to this. But when I listen to the Ulster Scots tunes against the Irish traditional tunes, I don't hear a fucking difference." And I feel like a lot of the guys in the group were kind of gobsmacked at me turning around and making a response like that, because obviously somebody who really understands the music and understands the nuances within the playing can tell, like we've had conversations about this before, that there are slight differences in the performance styles and maybe the writing. There's just these little nuances between the different cultures where a Scottish traditional tune is going to feel slightly different to an Irish traditional tune, which is going to feel different to a tune that comes out of somewhere like Nova Scotia, where there's a huge Ulster Scots community or whatever, because they're intermingling all those different influences that they have locally. It's almost like local dialects between different areas within the same country. You go to Kentucky and it's going to sound, the accent there is going to sound completely different to the accent in New Orleans, for instance. And it's exactly the same thing. It's those influences going on around that actually influence the way that people sound, and not only sound in their speaking voice or their singing voice, but also in the way that they play their instruments. And I just find that really curious. But yeah, I find it quite funny, and I found it very funny when I came out with that response, and people were so offended by it. I just found it hilarious at the fact they were so offended.
I don't think you're alone in feeling that way. You were probably just the one who actually spoke up about it.
Yeah.
Certainly not here in the States. And yeah, I guess I'm a total nerd for it. And I know we've talked about this because as a fiddle player coming from the classical world and having to learn these different styles after the fact, whether it's bluegrass or any type of European traditional music, I had to think very, very carefully with more of an adult brain at how I was actually going to change my playing to sound like one of these. And I really love knowing enough about the differences that I can hang in the different markets. And like I said, I don't claim to be traditional to any of them, but some people really take on one genre and they learn every single little thing about it. And I tend to enjoy kind of the span of them. And you named some of the big ones, but yeah, and it's like classical music or jazz, where unless you are immersed in the community, many people would say it all sounds the same. And like, so if I were to compare Tchaikovsky to Debussy, I would like those sound like night and day to me. But to anybody else, they would be it would be classical music, and it might not be their preference. I do not claim to know a thing about jazz, and that is one that I think a lot of it sounds the same. I'll be perfectly honest. But yeah, the accents and the relation to the fiddle style is something that oh my gosh, I could talk for days about. And I just really enjoy accents in general. And having spent enough time in Ireland, I can tell the difference in the regions, which is like where I get really nerdy. But yeah, the Irish fiddle tunes versus Scottish fiddle tunes, and then the Scots have a huge influence in Canadian fiddle tunes. And then you can kind of watch it trickle down. Oh, what are you laughing about?
I'm laughing because I can't even tell the difference in the accents most of the time. So I'm surprised that you can.
No, trust me, you could.
If you can even understand the words half the time, you're doing well.
I know. You're so right about that. Well, and a lot of the people I talk to have spent enough time in the States, they know to like slow down for us and enunciate.
Yeah.
But when you're in a local shop in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of the country,
that was something that I had to learn, and it's something I find really funny. Oftentimes when people meet me now, and I tell them where I'm from, they're actually really surprised because they don't feel like my accent reflects where I actually grew up. And I think that the reason that that's come about is the fact, because I've traveled so much and I've gotten so used to slowing down my speech and being very clear and making sure that I really enunciate my words and my phrases. And sometimes I even adapt the phrases that I'm using in order that I'm going to be more understood by people. I remember I actually I was over playing a few shows in Sweden. Must be a couple of years ago now, almost a couple of years ago. And I went to the Irish pub in the middle of, I think it was Gothenburg. And I went to the Irish pub and I was sat at the bar just having a drink. And this guy came over to me. I was just sat at the bar. He came over to order a drink himself. And I heard his accent. I knew that he was from the north of Ireland, and I got chatting to him. And he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I live just outside of Armagh City, which is up in the north of Ireland, about an hour outside of Belfast. It's about an hour and a half north of Dublin, just across the northern border between the north and the south of Ireland." And the guy turned around and he said, "There's no way you're from Armagh." And he called over his friend and he said, "Where in Armagh are you from?" I said, "I grew up in a little village called Rich Hill." He said, "I know Rich Hill. Your man over there's from Loch All. And Loch All's only 5 minutes away from Rich Hill. And there's no way that you're from Rich Hill." And I said, "I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I'm from Rich Hill." Like, and he brought over his friend. His friend chatted to me for a few minutes, and he's like, "There's no way you're from Rich Hill. Not a chance. You're an Armagh man." I was like, "Okay, cool."
That's so interesting. Yeah, and I felt like I heard your accent thicken even when you were just doing the impression of him.
Yeah, well, I was really trying to put on my Armagh accent so that
Yeah,
people
yeah.
would be able to understand a little better. But
Yeah, I feel like as musicians with musical ears too, especially with ears for melody, I think we are especially susceptible to kind of adapting to what's around us and picking up on some of the subtle nuances. Like I
yeah,
know having spent a little bit of time in, I mean, Scotland does this even more so, but phrases tend to go up at the end in Ireland and Scotland, and I just find myself going like, "We'll have another pint, yeah." Or something like that, and you're like,
yeah,
well, that's not anything I would ever say in the States, but you can't help it. And
yeah.
even if it's not like the way that you're pronouncing the words, even like the lilt, that
The
kind of
lilt, the
the
lilt of the
lyrical
words
lilt,
changes.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that happens in just the phrasing is so interesting. And I come from Michigan, where it's a really unpretty accent. It's nasally. My like theory is that they just never have to stop smiling, and it's your car, and let's go do the laundry, and oh, it's just makes your skin crawl. So I take very careful, and I am lucky like you to have traveled a lot, and I find the biggest compliment is when people say that they have no idea where I'm from, and then it's just kind of non-regional, just
because that means that you've got rid of that nasal quality.
that's right. That means that I found a way to neutralize it. Oh my gosh. It's so bad. And I'm open about it. Like my
Just
bandmate has a very, very thick Michigan accent.
you spray yourself with Febreze or something in the hope it's gonna
Literally,
get rid of it.
I recite the alphabet on the plane and go, how are we going to get rid of this?
A B C D E
Oh
F.
man, it's so bad. And my bandmate is from West Michigan, where it's particularly strong. And I give her a hard time about it. She's fully aware of it. But when we're in front of groups like in Boston or in California, I have to say something about it because I have to be like, I just need to comment on the fact that yes, that is that is weird and it is a little aggressive.
I
Yeah.
love it.
And we make a joke about it because we'll be like, yeah, pack your flannel pants. It's bad.
I'd love a pair of
But
flannel pants. I'm
flannel
wearing
pants.
my flannel
Yeah,
today.
you are wearing your flannel pants.
I don't have flannel
So,
pants. I've got black jeans on today, but and
see.
some tasty socks. But yeah, I need to get a pair of those flannel pants. I've got some flannel pajama pants, but I mean,
COVID is the time.
I felt like
I
since we
mean,
were doing a podcast, I needed to dress up a little bit.
I know. I put earrings in for the first time in a month, probably.
Yeah,
Just for you, Warren.
I really appreciate the effort you went to, Diana. You've the lighting's just perfect. You've got your earrings in. What more could I ask for?
If you're gonna do it, you got to do it right.
I'm a big Back to the Future fan. You've got one of those life preserver jackets on that Marty McFly wears. Love it. You've gone to
Life preserver jacket.
you've gone to all the lengths. You've gone to all the lengths.
This is what we would call a vest, but you would not call this a vest.
Well, they called it a life preserver in Back to the Future, so I'm just quoting Back to the Future.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know.
It's acceptable. It's acceptable.
Anyway, let's move on from
Anyways, yeah.
So I want to.
Yeah, no, that accents and music thing is really exciting, but you're right that it takes a trained ear and a lot of time to actually be able to make some distinctions for sure.
Yeah, that was a good segue back into our actual conversation again. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that you've spent pretty significant time touring all over the country, all over the United States, and you've been lucky enough to travel over to Ireland a little bit with some of the bands that you've played with. I'm aware that probably some of the people that are watching this podcast, maybe some of them are aspiring musicians, maybe some of them don't work in music at all, and maybe they're just curious about artists and the way that artists live. Uh, Describe that experience of touring for me. Tell me, like, what are your highs, what are your lows, because you've had some really extensive experience doing it, and you spend a lot of the year before this whole COVID pandemic kicked off. You were spending a lot of time on the road. You were traveling all over the place, playing in theaters and doing workshops in schools and all kinds of stuff. So describe that for me, and tell me, like, what were your favorite parts of that and what parts of that really suck.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Both exist for sure. That's interesting that you say that because I was just kind of doing a little journaling today about how much, or this week, about how much I just so genuinely miss the traveling aspect and new places and new faces and new foods and new weather. And I think until then, I always wondered, do I actually love the traveling or do I love the job and the traveling is like a byproduct of it, or vice versa? Like which came first? And to miss being on stage, obviously, but then to just miss the traveling part of things so much was, I don't know. I feel like so many of us are COVID is teaching us so much about what we don't miss and about what we do miss. When the slate has been wiped clean. And yeah, I miss being I miss being on planes. I miss being backstage. I miss meeting and greeting with people and the liaisons that would pick us up and the conversations you get to have with locals. And it I think that, like most people who travel full time, there was definitely like a graduation from local shows to van touring and then maybe bus touring, and then thankfully, and we don't take this for granted, because it's just two of us and sometimes three of us in the band, we fly most places and we don't have to travel with a whole rig. We just have our instruments and our personal gear. And that, I mean, that's definitely my preference. We enjoy driving too, but yeah, I think that being able to see how your music is received differently and just the amount of conversations, and I think that there was a shift too, and I couldn't tell you when it happened. It's pretty far back now, but when we decided that instead of just showing up and doing the gig, it was an opportunity to actually see this as a life of travel in addition. And so when we worked with the students during the day, one of the icebreakers we kind of asked them is, okay, where do we need to get dinner? And what's your local staple and what do we need to see while we're here? And rather than going, I mean, some days you have to nap in the hotel room, but if there's any opportunity to get out and see some of the local favorites or the landmarks, or go for the hike, up the mountain nearby or whatever it is, that changed everything, because then that's actually kind of a more sustainable lifestyle instead of feeling like this job takes you from home all the time. Because I don't know, it's that you and I have talked about this kind of the scarcity versus abundance mindset. Either you look at it as being constantly taken from home and having to do this job out on the road, or traveling just becomes as much a part of your lifestyle as being at home. And so it's not necessarily something that you have to make. It doesn't have to be a negative and positive. It's just either it's this version of my life or it's this version of my life. And you don't really have a choice but to do that when you're on the road 2 or 3 weeks a month. And so keeping routines alive is really important. And I've done some writing about that on my blog, is there have to be threads of consistency throughout both of those lives to really make it livable. And so it doesn't constantly feel like you're away from home. It's more that you have home and then you have travel. And yeah, to see it as an experience to see and feel and get to know new places and seize that for the opportunity that it is was kind of a game changer, because then it's not dreading packing and having to leave home. Then it's more like, where are we going to get to see? What are we going to get to eat? Who are we going to meet? And not everybody in the band feels that way, especially in the elders. Some have traveled so many years of their lives that that's not as huge a priority for them. But especially when I was running a lot, it was an opportunity, the morning before shows, to get out on foot and hit the coffee shop and meet people. And and like, you know, find what natural landmark is nearby. And I would say the and then from a musical standpoint, your music is received differently wherever you are. And the South versus Northern California versus Alaska versus the East Coast. I mean, the personalities and just they could all be their own country. You know, there's so many cultural differences, and you just I don't know. You find yourself just a perpetual student and kind of observer of life, and yeah, I wouldn't trade it for anything now.
I find it's a really hard thing to describe to people. I mean, I feel like our journeys as touring musicians have been quite different to some degree because I haven't toured nearly as extensively as you have. And where you are often playing like large performing arts theaters, I'm most of the time playing in shitty dive bars to nobody, uh, or coffee shops to
We
nobody. But
we did that for a long time, just
yeah,
so you know.
yeah.
That was lots of years of our life. Yeah.
But at the same time, like you're talking about that, those two sides of it, where you have that side where it's actually being on stage and performing, but then that only really takes up, I mean, with sound check and everything included, you might be looking at 3 hours of the day, 4 hours of the day, maybe at most. And
Right.
all of that other time around it for me has always been the time that I've really enjoyed most because it's been an excuse for me to get to see all the places that I've always wanted to see.
Right.
And it's so hard to explain. Like, I can't put into words like the feeling of joy that I have every time I walk into Dublin Airport, knowing that I'm going somewhere. When
Hmm.
I'm sat in the waiting lounge, waiting on the plane, sat in the plane, waiting on the plane taking off, like when I can see the little timer clicking down and I can see I've only got 2 hours until I land in New York or wherever it is I'm going to. And then you actually get there and you step off the plane and there's just this like adrenaline rush that's like, holy shit, I'm actually here, you know?
Hmm.
And I feel like in the times I've toured now on my own in the US 3 times. I mean, I've been over on a number of different trips, like riding and just traveling around and stuff, but I've gone over actually touring 3 times. The last tour that I did back in 2016 or 2017, I was there for 3 weeks and I think I played 18 shows in 3 weeks and I traveled across 8 different states, maybe 8 or 10 different states. And that was like driving like 4 or 5 thousand miles like around the country. And I was literally burning the candle at both ends as much as I possibly could. There were nights that I was sleeping for 2 hours a night and then hitting the road to drive for 4 or 5 hours from city to city. I tried to make the most of every single moment that I had on that trip. And I don't regret it by any means, but when I got home from it, it must have taken me at least a month to recuperate from that because I had just burnt myself out so much being there and being in all of these amazing places, like traveling to New Orleans and Memphis, Nashville, all over the place, like just getting to see so many incredible places that I never ever dreamt that I would have been. You know,
Absolutely.
it's such a hard feeling to put into words. And I mean, for me personally, I know that you absolutely love being on stage and you really miss that. Being on stage scares the shit out of me, quite honestly. Like I very rarely actually enjoy performing because I just feel so horribly self-conscious most of the time.
Oh my goodness. You would never know that about you, Warren.
I
Oh my
mean,
goodness.
I do enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy there's nothing like getting to perform songs that you've written for
Hmm.
people and people actually responding to them or seeing the like look on their face when the penny drops.
Sure.
There's something special about that, but at the same time, I feel like for the longest period of time, I've just been so horribly self-conscious about every note that comes out of my head, not my head, but my mouth, because I'm actually singing. Uh,
Hmm.
but every note that comes out of my mouth, every note that I'm playing on the guitar, I'm conscious of every nuance. And if I make a balls of something, I'm lingering on it for the next 5 minutes during the performance. And that's all I can think about, regardless of how the rest of it's going. I'm just thinking about how horrible that one falsetto note was at the end of the chorus. Uh, but yeah, there is, regardless of that, like, regardless of the fact that performing actually scares the living shit out of me, the actual traveling and getting to see all these amazing places, and way more importantly, getting to meet all these amazing people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just can't put that feeling into words. I can't get enough of it. To me, it's absolutely a drug. It's
Mm-hmm. Yes.
probably, alongside of music is probably the healthiest drug that I've ever gotten addicted to in the course of my life. But traveling's definitely a really close second.
Absolutely. I'm just nodding and identifying with everything, except the nervous to be on stage part. That really surprises me about
Yeah, but
you.
that's because you're great, Diana. That's why you
Oh
don't. That's why
no,
you don't have to worry
stop.
about that crap.
Stop.
If
No,
only
it's
I
just
could
a.
be more awesome. If only I could be
Oh
as
my
awesome as you,
gosh.
Diana.
Oh my gosh. You know what? Not what I was getting at. That was me saying you're wonderful. How could you possibly be nervous on stage?
Yeah, that was me.
Um,
That was me deflecting your compliment before it came, because
oh
I've
my
gotten
gosh,
very
no
good at that over the
way.
years.
Take it. Because, but you're not alone in that. And I know lots of people who know that they've been called to play music and be on stage, but when it actually comes to the act of doing it, it's petrifying. And I mean, I can relate to that, focusing on every little thing that's gone wrong too. But that's why you are as excellent as you are, because you have a
It's
very high standard for yourself.
it's not scary as long as I keep my eyes closed.
Interesting.
As long as
Yeah.
my eyes are
Oh,
closed,
seeing.
I'm
Yeah, I just
as long
live
as my
for
eyes
it.
are closed, I'm fine. But as soon as I know that
Interesting.
somebody's watching me, I'm just
Mm,
petrified. And
that's so
really,
interesting.
you know what's really weird, and this has always been the case. I have always been way more nervous to perform in front of a smaller number of people than I am
Mm-hmm.
in front of a
Yeah.
large crowd. I've
Yep.
performed gigs sometimes for probably 2,500 people,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a piece of cake.
It's
If
just
you
a see at that point. You can't actually see faces or eyes, and
if you
yeah.
put me in front of two and a half people, like two people and a dog, I'm shitting myself.
Right up next to you, so you can actually lock eyes with them. Totally
Yeah,
different experience. I know.
yeah.
I agree with you totally.
And then
And people ask,
the dog comes in at some point and he starts sniffing your crotch or something. And that makes it even more awkward. I
you're
mean,
like, "This is my worst nightmare."
yeah,
Please.
yeah. One of the two guys is talking to the bartender or something, and
Oh,
they're
that's
not even paying attention to
oh
what you're playing. And then you're like,
oh.
what is life? What's the point?
What is life? Oh man, we've all been there. Oh my gosh, yeah. And I agree with you. People, if the conversation about performance anxiety comes up, it's always with regards to like the crowds of thousands. And yeah, no, mm-mm. And you only have to plop one very important person in any type of crowd, and that could be the difference between whether I'm terrified and thinking about every note I'm playing, or whether I'm relaxed and just enjoying this being up there. But
Now that said,
yeah, that's interesting.
I've never had the experience where I've been playing in front of 2,500 people and a dog has come up and sniffed my crotch in the middle of it.
We should be
So
clear about that.
so maybe it's
Yeah.
the dog that's the problem. Maybe it's not the
I
people.
mean, I'm glad we're getting somewhere, because maybe the dog is really where the actual phobia lies.
Maybe.
Because I mean, it's a
I always
serious
thought I loved
concern.
dogs, but I don't know.
It's a serious concern. I mean,
I'm starting
performing
to
arts center.
question. I'm questioning everything now.
A service dog
Questioning
walks
everything.
in, and Warren clams up.
Yeah.
But I also I hear you on everything you were saying about traveling too. Oh my gosh, especially this time of year, because I would find myself usually somewhere in Europe in the spring and in the fall, and this is the time where I just want to be exploring and getting to know a new place. But um, yeah, absolutely. And I it took several years, and the Moxie Strings in particular. My best friend Allie and I, she's the cellist in the Moxie Strings, so it's primarily the two of us that do the most of our touring together. And we have a wonderful couple of drummers we play with too. But we had to shift over the course of our last 15 years as a band, in that it used to be that going on tour was when we would party and be up until 4 a.m. and hop a flight, and then, just be hungover all day until we started drinking right after the gig again, if not during the gig. And it was like vacation. It was so fun. And then we started touring more and more, and the stakes got a little higher, and the venues got a little more important, and the complete opposite had to happen. And barring Irish festivals, which are kind of known for their social aspect, going on the road needed to be about health primarily. Like, priority one was Where are we going to find the nearest Whole Foods so that we can stock our hotel room for the next couple of days? We only choose hotel rooms that have gyms, or we'll take a look at the map and see if there are nature trails nearby. And sleep is priority. And yeah, we just kind of had to make that shift because, like you said, when you're out for 2 weeks and home for 2 weeks, that's half and half. It's not like you're going on a 5-day tour and can kind of go on a bender and then have a week to recover. It's got to stay pretty perpetually healthy. And anything you can do in terms of the quality of the food you're eating or the amount you're sleeping, or I do a lot with like daily routines, just to make sure, whether it's mindfulness or stretching or yoga or your workout routine, just something to keep that thread of consistency from when you're home and away, even in just the products you bring with you. And it could take a toll on your body to do that much change all the time, for that consistently, even little things like a water bottle that has a filter in it so you're not drinking random tap water everywhere you go. I mean, you just have to kind of come up with the tricks to make it a sustainable lifestyle. But when you do, it's magical. I mean, I'm with you. I miss it. I miss it more than anything, as much as I miss being on stage, for sure.
See, that's why I never want to get to your level of success, because up until now, I've never played any gigs that mattered. And it just meant that I could party and get shit faced all I wanted. And I want to
So
keep that. I want to keep that going as long as possible. And if it means that if the stakes get higher and I have to start paying more attention and being more conscious of how well behaved I'm being, then I don't want that. I don't
you're
want
out.
any. I don't want any higher stakes. I want to keep playing Belcourt taps till the day I
You know
die
what?
for two people and their dog.
To each his own. And then we really need to get over the dog thing. Maybe we should go to the Humane Society and do a little sound check.
Yeah. Tell me this. I know that we've
Yeah.
talked at length about this whole COVID situation, the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's obviously been a really tough time for a lot of creative people, myself and yourself included.
Hmm.
What have you been doing personally to try and keep yourself motivated and try and keep yourself creative throughout this like mandatory downtime that we found ourselves in?
That's a great question. And I enjoy asking other artists this too, because I think everybody's finding their own challenges and what's working for them. And I will say one of the things I've written about and what was really a game changer for me was being just patient with myself when I wasn't being creative, because there's so many feelings that we're all confronting right now, and it's grief from the loss of our lifestyle, it's withdrawal from adrenaline rush, it's just desperately missing the people we make music with and being around people in general. And there's just this huge hole, and we're all feeling these different symptoms of it. Some days it's really nice to have the quiet time and the break, and then other days it's the silence is deafening, and it's all you can think about is how much you'd like your life back and how empty things feel. And especially in the early days, I feel like there was lots of buzz about how to be using this time, and it was lots of live streams and people releasing singles and posting about writing. And social media has been like a really beautiful way to connect through all of this, but it's also been so much easier to compare when we're all very, very vulnerable right now, when none of us is really thriving. And if we are, good for you, but you might not be making it a lot very easy for the people who aren't. And so kind of immediately my response, because I speak openly to the musician community, like through my blog and socials and that kind of thing, was to say there is no pressure here. If you need to not play your instrument for a couple weeks, or just turn off the creativity dial if you need to, like anything that you're doing right now, everybody's going to be coping totally differently with this. And it took me a while, I think, to actually kind of take a dose of my own medicine, because it is so hard to see other people doing things. And I just couldn't be motivated. I just couldn't do it. And like there was a time in the spring last year where I kind of felt a little bit of a surge of excitement about having an expansive time to start working on my own music and seeing the opportunity in it. And then I got burnt out by the end of the summer trying to keep something going. And it's almost like we take for granted the amount that we rely on that external feedback, whether it's just to tell you that your music is enjoyable or make you feel like an accomplished musician or make you feel like a musician in general, because like music exists in a vacuum. It's so hard to not share it with people. And yeah, I there was the kind of this loss of identity that I was happening with me, and I know was happening with lots of other people, where we had been defining ourselves using terms like musician or performer or traveler or touring musician, and now none of those things were necessarily true anymore, and we had to like kind of go back to baseline. And it took me a while to get through it, and I've written a good amount about this, that I just got totally stalled at the end of last summer, and it was so frustrating. But really, what it took for me to get past it was to stop fighting it. And stress is in the resistance. And I was just pushing back and showing up to the studio, and I did keep showing up, but everything, I could not produce anything that sounded good. And then it was just total apathy. And then, you know, you get in that shame spiral of the apathy makes you more stressed out and makes you more apathetic, and just stop fighting it. And I did that, and I packed my instrument up and I said 2 weeks, we're just not even going to try. And that was where some serious breakthroughs started to happen, in terms of actually having to quiet down all of the voices that were saying go, 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 and just sit in the baseline, the quiet, the who are you outside of being on stage, when you don't define yourself by your job and your career. And we are musicians, and music is fundamental to who we are, but it is not all of our identity. It is still something we do. It's a trade that we've picked up and made our lives. And that honestly is work that was probably more necessary than I even realized going forward. You know, how do you enjoy your own company and not and relax a little bit on this like drive to be going forward at all times, because that's kind of its own drug. And just to sit back and enjoy the space. And ultimately, like it mellowed out, and I was able to just give myself permission to be outside and enjoy people's company and take a break from things for a while. And as is usually the case, as soon as I was able to quiet some of those voices, the creativity did start creeping back in. And then I was ready. And then it was kind of like a surge of working on my own music and learning some new software programs, and the ideas kind of started popping back up, and I was just excited to get back into it. But I had to just surrender. I had to just relinquish control for a while. And that all being said, I think everybody's process and feelings during this completely unprecedented, crazy, just emotionally heavy time are going to be completely different. And I think number one is just to be patient with how this process is going to roll itself out for you. And it could have been a really devastating year, or it could have been a year of opportunity, even if it's just to rest. You know, it's going to be how we look at it and how we've decided to mentally approach the time that is going to be how we look back on this, as being terrible or potentially having some positive benefits as well.
I really want to touch some more on that topic of the voices in particular,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that as creative people, that's something that a lot of us really struggle with. And I know personally, I'm more than happy to be open in saying that I suffer from battling those voices all the time too.
Mm-hmm.
And strangely, over this pandemic period, at the very beginning of it, I really struggled with them for a few months. And at some point, I just managed to turn a corner and completely shut them off. And for me, the voices have always been niggling away at me saying, you're not good enough. You're never going to be good enough. You're running out of time to be good enough. And it's always the same thing. It just comes back time and time again. Eventually, I'll manage to still them for a little while, and I'll just say, no, 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 don't listen to that. Keep going. That's just you being concerned with something you don't need to be concerned about, and it's just distracting you from your goal. And I'm curious to know, that's my personal experience. And I think that the reality is that has stemmed for me from some need for external validation of what I'm doing a lot of the time. And when I worry about those things, like I think like I'm running out of time. It's really that I'm thinking I'm running out of time to be able to get a record deal or for somebody to give me some money to be able to take this to the next stage. And I'm just curious, I guess, in your position, how does it compare? Like what are the voices that niggle away at you at times? What is it that you think drives that like vicious cycle of
Mhm.
stress and the resistance as you described it quite eloquently?
Yeah, man, I'm just nodding along and identifying with all of that because I think time is a huge source of my personal stress. Minute to minute, and how you structure your day, but then also the urgency of feeling like you haven't made enough happen already in your musical career, and for whatever reason, time is running out. And unfortunately, in our industry, youth is kind of coveted. And that's not always true, especially when, and I guess this kind of brings up another topic because you really want to believe that external things are like the way that you look or your age um, don't play a huge role, but they do. And
What
it
they
is
do.
something that yeah, and I wish that it weren't the case, but it's so those are two voices that kind of flutter around me as well, some to do with age and to do with looks, where you're thinking like I want to be focusing on my music, but I can't completely not focus on some of these other things that need to be taken into account if I'm going to be trying to make some type of career happen. And yeah, the urgency, so especially the urgency of time in the grander sense, and that I would love to think that really amazing musicianship and just heart and quality are what make a successful album. And that's true. And I think talent and authenticity goes such a long way. But it's usually some of this external stuff that chews away at me. Like, yeah, just the fact that you and I are almost exactly the same age, and a lot of people would say that that's like I don't even want to say this, but that's like kind of like tapering off of what would be the peak for a lot of solo artists anyway. Um,
Well, I
and
mean, in pop music, you look at pop music, and I've
yeah,
heard a lot of people say, like, once you pass 21, 22 in pop, you're done.
isn't that crazy?
Like
They're children.
you may as well retire. And like when I was
No,
21 or 22, I didn't have a fucking thought in my head that was worth sharing.
no,
So I don't know what I was
no.
supposed to be writing about or what anyone was supposed to give a shit about when they were listening
Such
to
a
me.
good point. Such a good point. What could possibly be relatable at that age when you have no actual experience?
I don't feel like I had anything to say until I was like 29 or 30.
At least I know. I'm so with you. I completely understand. So there's definitely that. But I also, for me, I'm to just be very like honest. I know that I'm kind of at a precipice in terms of what direction I could take my career next, and I'm craving some type of forward motion, which was part of why COVID, the beginning of this pandemic, really set me back because I just want to be. It is my nature to just have my wheels spinning constantly. And I had to kind of acknowledge the fact that sometimes my wheels just spinning for the sake of spinning was doing nothing productive. And I was checking things off of lists, but was I actually taking a step back and making serious gains in some of these larger projects? Probably not. And that was hard to not have a way to be productive and to be tackling my day to day, and then I just had to kind of sit without that drug. I mean, productivity is absolutely a drug for me. Um, and I'm feeling kind of lost right now. I don't know what the next project's going to look like. Like you said in your intro, I have tons of things that I could be working on and things that I'm really passionate about. Um, but in terms of like my creative and artistic focus right now, I can't find my footing exactly on exactly what I want my personal sound to look like. And it still feels like I'm immersed in this exploratory phase, which is fine. I'm I'm on Clubhouse literally every day. I'm just listening to master classes and podcasts and taking fiddle workshops and just and you and I have mentioned this too in times where you can't figure out how to be productive, we like switch to consumption,
Yeah.
and just turn it into research. And it just feels like it's been, and then learning this program, learning Ableton and finding more fluency in that, but still not knowing exactly what sounds are going to be representative of what I'm feeling. And then I have like what I call creative constipation in so many ways, and that I have these like full tracks in my head, but I don't feel like I have the skills as of now to bring them to life. You know, like I sing, but not to the point of being comfortable singing solo on stage, and that's a work in progress. And I don't play all the instruments to be able to create the rest of these tracks, and so I'm just kind of stalled, you know, and not really sure where to send this direction. So I do end up just kind of sitting in this paralysis on a pretty regular basis. And any type of forward momentum is good, but I would say the source of a lot of those voices for me right now is you should be doing, and me not really me going into my creative space and showing up like we say we need to. Just keep showing up and working on something. But I could be playing piano for an hour and then kind of noodling on a guitar and then doing my voice lesson and then playing some fiddle tunes. But where do those synergize? And how is that time well spent when I can't really figure that out right now?
If I were you, I would divert some of your research time to looking into some pharmaceutical companies that are going to deal with that creative constipation that you're dealing with. Because there's drugs for everything else in the US. There's drugs for everything else over there. There's got to be somebody that's figured out how to ease that creative constipation and get that flowing again.
I agree. Or that's our next project. You and I
Maybe,
have a
maybe
shortage of projects, actually.
you
If
got to
there's
add
one
that.
thing you and I need, it's more projects.
Add that to the list. Add that to our list of collaborative projects that we're going to work on. Figure out
New
a
tab on the
drug.
website.
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
This new developmental drug that's going to go into clinical trials at the end of 2021.
We'd have lots of people that we could test it on.
Oh man, we'd make a fucking fortune from it.
I know.
Pharmaceuticals are where it's at the moment.
It's where the money is.
It's where it's all happening.
Conscience free.
Tell me this. You have been living in Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA for the past few years. First of all, why Nashville? And secondly, how do you manage to overcome the sense of like just overwhelm with the fact that everyone is really there chasing after the same dream that you are?
Yeah, about that. Well, I do feel like I have a slightly different perspective because I'd say the majority of the dreams that are being chased in Nashville are singer-songwriters, more your world than mine. And I do feel like I had a unique experience moving to Nashville, not necessarily feeling like I needed to get something from the city. I was excited or in terms of an opportunity. I was there, and to be honest, it was a relationship that brought me there in the first place. And then I just kind of fell in love with the community. And even though I'm no longer in that relationship, I couldn't leave. It is like being, it's like kind of being at a professional development conference at all times. You know, like there's any number of things you could be doing to learn something at every moment of the day and every corner of town. Yeah. Which is amazing unless you are really hard on yourself and have really bad FOMO. But that being said,
that's me, Diana. That's me that you're talking about.
I know. Well, me too. I totally understand. But that said, I noticed right when I moved there, and that was one of the things I was concerned about, was that if I'm already hard on myself for not doing enough, what's it going to feel like to move to a city where everybody is doing so much? And more than that at every given moment, there is something somewhere that you could be learning from somebody. And there's live music, there's you know, people hosting jam sessions at their homes. You know, there's always something to be done, like hundreds of things at every moment. And I was concerned about that because even when somebody hosts a web conference on a random Saturday, and I'm unavailable to do it here in COVID, I still think all day about like the sessions that I could be in when I'm doing other things. But so that's just my nature, would be to spin my wheels about that. But I was pleasantly surprised that turning down opportunities to be out for the sake of being in working on your craft is widely regarded and highly acceptable. You know, and I think it was it's not uncommon to say like I have a write, or I've got this song idea, I'll see you guys next time. And the inward creative process is known to be equally important as being out and networking. And that's been my experience. And I I don't think that, and it's possible, especially after I say this, but I don't think that my next big musical project will be found in Nashville. I think Nashville for me is to be inspired and learn from so many people around me. And more than that, when I was living in other places, you feel a little bit out of place as somebody who's gone for 2 weeks of the month. And I was living up in northern Michigan, which is my ideal off-road lifestyle. It's right on the lake. It's totally nature driven. It's a bunch of young artists, forward thinking, just kind souls. I mean, that's where my family for life is. And ultimately, just flying in and out of that airport wasn't quite working. And I also knew that I needed to take another risk in life if I was going to continue to grow myself musically. And that's part of where Nashville came from. Is I could have lived very comfortably up there for a very long time and not made any big advances. But that being said, it's hard to maintain friendships when all of your friends are non-musicians and don't quite understand the touring lifestyle. And it's a lot of work to try to maintain a friendship from the road, and you're trying to text and keep up with people's lives, but ultimately if you have to decline invites to 6 or 7 parties in a row, you might not get the invite next time. It's just really hard to stay relevant. But the opposite is true in Nashville, in that everybody's kind of in the same boat. Everybody understands what it's like to be on the road. They understand what it means to maintain friendships remotely. Conversations all kind of revolve around music, which when you're really excited and it's your passion and it's like where every ounce of you, it's so exciting that, when you're standing around, drinking beers, it might be football in another town that you're talking about. And in Nashville, it's going to be something music related most of the time. And not all the time, but just the fact that there's this like undercurrent of it's in every single thing that you do. It's very comforting and makes you feel like you're around your people and that you're not strange and that everybody just kind of understands. There's just this common link that bonds us all, even down to like the logistics of the fact that doctors' offices understand that you're going to be going on and off tour, or like the accountants in town are very music specific and understand touring and per diems and deductions and that kind of thing. And so it's like I would compare it to like a small mining town, where like everybody is somehow connected to this one big industry that keeps the town alive. And
Yeah.
in this town, it's music.
I feel like in some ways you're quite unique within my friend circle, in the sense that many of the people that I know there in Nashville are chasing after that singer-songwriter dream, or they're chasing after the songwriter dream, maybe more specifically. Because not everybody who writes songs is necessarily an artist in their own right or a performer in their own right. And there are some really great writers there that don't really perform. But I feel like you kind of exist outside of that in a way, because the singer-songwriter thing, although it is a part of what you do, it's not your main focus, and you have so many other things that you work on outside of that. And they always say about Nashville that Nashville is like a 10-year town, and now it takes 7 to 10 years for people to be able to network and make the connections that they're ever going to really have any kind of success within it. I'm curious, as somebody who kind of would move there, taking somebody else into as an example, somebody who moves there primarily to be a singer-songwriter or just a songwriter, and they move there with that intent of, it's going to take me 7 to 10 years to figure this thing out and to manage to make any kind of success of this. You don't really seem to have that same need to be there, in my opinion. And so I'm curious, is there anywhere else that you could see yourself moving to at some point to get out of that community that exists there, but integrate yourself into another community that exists elsewhere? Like, LA or New York, or even you're talking about Traverse City that you visited quite a bit, and the kind of artist community that exists there, Austin, Texas, wherever it is, there are any number of hubs throughout the US that have these little pockets of communities that are just like Nashville, but yet Nashville still has this like predominance of musicality about it for whatever reason. But for you, is there anywhere else that you could see yourself going to outside of Nashville?
Oh, absolutely. And you nailed it. And I often tell students I work with, I mentor a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds who, after working with them in clinic, I'll encourage them to we'll sit down and talk about what they want their life and music to look like. And a lot of times, even with my degree in music, I would not necessarily advise that. I would say go, depending on what your dream gig is and what you want your day-to-day musically to look like, you most often your time is going to be well spent immersing yourself in a community of people who you want to emulate and whose lives you admire and who you want to be like. And so maybe some parents might not love me for that, but if you're going to spend tuition money, go take lessons, go take fiddle lessons from somebody, in, like you said, Austin, Texas, or find what you're excited about. And so I know that being unattached right now, and I own a home in Nashville that I can easily rent out and could literally kind of uproot myself and go anywhere. I am again feeling a little bit lost in terms of what my goal, my dream actually is, because I've enjoyed doing so many different things. I love being one of six in a band. That's the elders, and I got to be like kind of the female fiddle player, and that is a really fun experience for me, being on stage with that many other musicians. I also really love being the front person of a band and being able to be the dialogue and really connect with the audiences. And I also love teaching, and I love the music that I'm making as a solo artist. And I know that I'm at a point right now where the decision I make next is going to be very pivotal in terms of what direction musically I go. Right now, I've been learning a lot about country and how to adjust my playing with slides and double stops to really sound. There's a couple really wonderful country players in town that play with the greats, that are on these arena tours, well, under normal circumstances. And I know that if I really worked my ass off to sound like them, I could probably jump on one of those gigs eventually, like you said, in years probably of networking to get there. But is that really what I want to do? And I don't know, because right now I'm like, I have all these sounds in my head that I really want to work on, and it's very electronic and it's very like beats and dance driven, in which case I need to get my ass to LA. And I need to be going back and forth from LA to Berlin a couple times to like kind of really actually get my feet on the ground there. But is that what I want to spend my time on? I think so, but I don't know. And then the elite string players are known for being in Brooklyn and in Boston, or in New York City, primarily Brooklyn and in Boston. That's where the jazzers live, and where people who are highly, highly educated formally on their instruments are going to be in those two markets. And I always get super buzzed to be there too, because it always encourages me to take my actual technique to the next level. And so you can feel like how lost I feel right now.
If I was you,
it's given me a little time.
If I was you, I would want to be the person who gets to play that little fiddle lick at the start of Calling Baton Rouge for Garth Brooks, where Garth Brooks comes in, he's like, Calling Baton Rouge, Calling Baton Rouge. I would want to be that person. I think that's what you need to strive for.
It's a dream gig, absolutely. You Irishmen and your Garth Brooks. Oh my gosh, I've never met a culture that is more obsessed with Garth Brooks than
although Garth got himself in a lot of trouble recently because he booked these stadium shows in Croke Park in Dublin, and there was something really weird about the way it was set up. The promoters booked him for, I think it was a couple of gigs to begin with. So like Garth Brooks is like the biggest country artist ever. And in Ireland, they love country music and they love Garth Brooks. And so when it was announced that Garth Brooks was coming back for this huge comeback tour after he went off and did his weird thing where he brought out that album under the other name and whatever, he figured out that was a bunch of shit and he needed to stop doing that stuff.
I forgot about that.
And then he came back and he did his own thing, and everybody in Ireland was like, oh my God, Garth Brooks, we got to buy tickets to go and see Garth Brooks. So then
I've heard like
everybody,
multiple nights of sold out arenas,
except it
right?
didn't sound like that. It was more like, oh my God, here's Garth Brooks coming. We got to go and see fucking Garth Brooks. Garth Brooks is my favorite country artist of all time. So everybody bought tickets to these two stadium shows. They sold out the stadium shows in like probably seconds.
Yeah.
And that was all well and good. The promoter that had booked the shows then decided, oh, people fucking love Garth Brooks. We need to book Garth Brooks for some more shows. We need to put on 10 shows instead of 2 shows. And then they were like, right, okay, we're going to book Croke Park for another few nights. So I think they ended up putting on like 5 shows in Croke Park. And
That's
Croke Park's like,
insane.
it's like 80,000 people they can cram into Croke Park.
The
So,
percentage of citizens in Ireland that must have been at one of those shows.
aha,
How
but
many
here,
people-
but here's the thing. So they sold out the 2 shows to begin with, right?
Mhm.
So that's what, 160,000 tickets or whatever. They then decided, the promoter said, we need to put on more Garth Brooks shows because Garth Brooks, people fucking love Garth Brooks, even though he's been gone for like 10 years and he did this fucking weird thing where he went and did this other side project that nobody gave a shit about. Somehow he's come back and he can still sell hundreds of thousands of tickets. We need to book more fucking shows. So the promoters come along and they say, right, we need to book Garth in for some more shows. They book more shows and they start selling tickets to more shows. But they booked the shows knowing that Croke Park had a stipulation, because it was in a residential area in the middle of Dublin. It had a stipulation where they were only allowed to have like 3 shows in a week or something. So they booked 5 shows for him, thinking that because it was Garth Brooks, that the
Surely.
city
The rules would not
council
apply.
would just turn around and say, oh, it's fucking Garth Brooks. We can make an exception for Garth because Garth's loved here and everybody wants to go and see Garth. Instead, the city council turned around and said, nah, we're not going to change this. Like,
You
you're
get
just
3 nights.
you're getting 3 nights
That's
maximum.
crazy.
So
Oh,
then,
no.
so then they had sold all the tickets and they turned around and they said, right, the only thing that we can really do here is put on 2 shows a day. So he put on like a matinee performance and an evening performance. Garth Brooks turned around and he said, either the 5 shows go ahead as is, or I'm not coming to Ireland. And he didn't come.
What?
They cancelled all the shows, and Ireland has fucking hated him ever since.
Fair enough. Like a whole country would hate. How many years ago was that?
I want to say maybe 6 or 8 now. It was like right at the point when he just made his comeback.
Wow.
But
Well,
all the
and, you
people,
know, after that,
all the people here were just like sitting there like, all we want to hear is Colin Baton Rouge. We want to hear the because that sounds fucking Irish, and we love that, and we love the fact that Garth loves the Irish,
right.
and the Irish love Garth, and all we want to hear is that. But
I'm telling you, the obsession with Garth, I will never quite understand, but that is wild. Well, you know, after that A&E special he did, I think a lot of people were like, is he really as wonderful as we all think he is?
I loved that show. I thought that show was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, I have heard nothing but good reports about Garth Brooks.
Really?
I've heard nothing but good things from people that have
not make a good move.
People that have written with him, from people that have had songs cut by him. He seems to treat people incredibly well when he doesn't have to, because it's not the standard within the industry to treat them the way that he does. But he obviously has compassion for the way that the position that writers are in and all of those different things. He understands, and he just seems to be a cool guy as far as I've heard. But I can see why people might have watched that Netflix special or whatever and kind of said, I don't know about this dude. Yeah. He seems a bit too nice for my liking. And he didn't fucking come to Ireland when he said he was going to come to Ireland.
That's crazy. I didn't know that story. Don't worry, Warren. When he watches your podcast, you've sung his praises.
Garth,
so you're set.
If you ever stumble across this, I love you. I want to take you out for a drink at some point. I didn't say. I said everything that I said. I stand
Garth, don't
behind.
Listen to him. Garth, don't listen to him.
I stand behind every word that I said. I love you, Garth.
This fiddle player right
I'm
here.
telling you, I'm going to work on that. You don't even need the fiddle. I'll just sing that into a mic for you, and it'll be great. The arena's going to love it.
My job is obsolete. If you can sing like that, my job doesn't even need to exist.
Absolutely.
But you know what? On that note, I've thought hard about that because somebody I've met recently, her name's Janae in Nashville, is known for being, she's been in Nashville probably working in Nashville probably 15 or 20 years. So she's really put her time in. And now she's Blake Shelton's fiddle player, and she's recorded with everybody you could ever imagine. So, of course, I'm studying her parts, and I go listen to her play whenever I can. And I find the record she's on, and I play along, and I figure out how she's doing all the little stuff. But I have to be honest with myself about, like, I enjoyed being the fiddle player in a band, but I also really, really miss the dialogue and the connection that came from smaller audiences and being the one to actually speak and connect. So don't get me wrong, if I was offered a gig like that, I would take it. But if I have to think about day to day how I'm going to spend my time with one of these goals in mind, I don't know if that would be it. I just
Yeah.
wish I knew what it was going to be, you know? And so many factors in my life, what town I'm in, who my next partner is, what instrument I decide to learn next, all of these will affect musically where I'm headed. Like I'm just kind of floating right now. And it's exciting because it means I can do any number of things, but I'm kind of waiting for the universe to nudge me in any direction right now, you know. But I guess
I
that's an
actually
exciting place to be.
I actually just had another story that came back to mind there where I was reminded of one of the very first times that I ever visited Nashville. And this is a complete like tangent from what you're talking about there. Well, it's
Yeah,
probably not a
perfect.
bit, probably not much of a tangent, but one of the first times that I arrived in Nashville, of course, like any tourist does, I headed to Broadway and I went down to check out some of the bands in Broadway. Was completely blown away. And I remember the bar that I really fell in love with on Broadway was a bar called Legends Corner,
Hmm.
which is right on the edge of Broadway, just across from the Bridgestone Arena. And one of the first bands I think I ever saw in there, it was the middle of the afternoon. It was probably like 3 or 4 in the afternoon, still light outside. Really
Yeah.
nice day. I can still picture it. And I can picture standing at the bar, ordering a drink. I think it was Nashville was the first place I ever had Fireball, so it was probably like a Fireball in the rocks or a Fireball in Sprite or something. Uh,
There's a time and a place for that,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, but that time and place was 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon for
In
me,
the afternoon.
and
Sunlight streaming in.
yeah, I just remember sitting at the bar and ordering my drink, and this band was playing on stage. It's a pretty small venue. This band was playing on stage, and they actually had a fiddle player in the band. I don't know her name. I have never met her since, but she had, from memory, she had short blonde hair, like pretty short, like spiky-ish kind of blonde hair,
Hmm.
and she actually hopped up on top of the bar. Now this place was pretty much empty at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, but she fucking hopped up on top of the bar for calling Baton Rouge, and she did that. But she was giving it stacks. She was playing to Legends Corner like she was playing to 10,000 people in an arena. She was like, you would have thought she was in like a fucking rock band, like playing this thing, like throwing her hair back and forth, the little bit of spiky hair that she had on top of her head. She was fucking loving it. And I was just like, this girl is like, she just has it. She has that thing. And she needs to be playing with Garth Brooks one day. And maybe
Hmm.
she is playing with Garth Brooks nowadays. I don't know. But
That's how it happens.
yeah, it was pretty crazy to see that level of passion. Like I could
Hmm.
just imagine me playing a gig in Belfast at 3 or 4 in the afternoon and nobody being there, nobody giving a shit that
Just,
I am there, and just
yeah.
fucking rocking out anyway and not giving a shit. Like that's what I strive for. One day I hope
I'm
that I'm gonna be the person up on top of the bar playing Colin Baton Rouge on my mouth fiddle.
your mouth fiddle. Everybody, Warren Atwell on the mouth fiddle. Everybody's like,
And everybody's like, fucking Garth Brooks, I love Garth Brooks, I love this
no,
song.
not here. They probably would. They'd sing right along with you.
Okay,
No, man, that's such a good example too of just people are hustling so hard in this town. Like you're not going to be able to just bring 30% to a show on an afternoon. It's got to be 100% because you never know who's sitting in that audience.
yeah,
And you never know who knows somebody who is sitting in that audience. And yeah, the caliber of the musicianship is just so high. And you know from being just at those songwriters rounds, like at some of the smaller bars that we love, like those could all be hit songs, you know? And it's I know that that also scares a lot of people away because it can be really, really overwhelming. And even as a fiddle player, there's not a ton of us in town. Like there's probably not as many as you'd think, and we all start to know each other. There's a couple like music shops in town, and when one fiddle player does a CD release party, we all tend to flock there, and which is cool because it kind of becomes like a small community within a larger community, similar to the songwriters, but the level of playing is just unreal. And so then you find yourself like looking for what is going to set you apart. And for her, it might be jumping on the bar and that ridiculous stage presence, which for the right tour is exactly what they need, you know? Or for me, some of us play 5 strings, or I do a lot with the electronics and the pedals. And so I find myself like kind of taking gigs in that world a little bit more because that's just one of the things that I can do that not every fiddle player can. So yeah, it grows you so much in that way in terms of marketing yourself and figuring out how to diversify your skills and just the you can't slack. I mean, you can't, like I said, you can't show up at 30% because there's going to be somebody that shows up at 110. But
I feel like it would be a little bit remiss of me. There's any number of things that we could talk about throughout the course of this podcast, but I do think that it would be very remiss of me, quite honestly, to not bring up your non-profit that you set up a few years ago,
oh,
which
sure.
you run, called the Mox Project.
Hmm.
Um, Explain a little bit about what you actually do through that, and just tell us how that came about, like why you even wanted to go down the non-profit route.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so nice of you to ask about that, Warren. Thank you. This is really enjoyable. So I have been, my degree is in both performance and education, and teaching has always been a really huge part of my life. And to be honest, if I was to say something is my calling that just comes absolutely effortlessly and naturally to me, it's more so teaching than it is music. I have to work quite a bit harder at music than I do teaching. It's just always been there, and kind of being in front of a room and leading, and that's just always been a part of my personality, which I am grateful for because it works out well in my job. But so we started teaching these clinics and adding this educational component to our band, which ultimately, and I tell a lot of other musicians this, you and I have talked about this, if you're comfortable teaching, you have this whole, like, you could double the amount of work you do in your musical career. And it's a component that not every band can add, but when you're traveling to these different towns and you can do some work in schools or host a community workshop or something like that, it's just a win-win all across the board. Funding comes from different places, it's more money for you, it's exciting for the community, you can collaborate, it's just like so wonderful. And so we were doing that and kind of woke up to how fun and exciting and beneficial that is for everybody. But somewhere in that process, I'd say 5 or 6 years after teaching those clinics and touring full time, I just started to feel like there was a shift in me that said, music is my platform, but when I really feel like what lights me up and what really makes me feel like the most electrified and alive, it's feeling like I'm doing something to help somebody, like in service of somebody else. And
Yeah.
so the most electrifying shows for me are when somebody comes up to afterwards and says, this allowed me to escape, or this really gave me something to think about, or I felt seen. And those were just becoming such pivotal moments. I found my dialogue changing on stage and just being a little more vulnerable and inviting people in so that it can be a more experience driven. And so I just kind of had to just step back and say the words, like, I think I'm a servant first. Like, I think that is where my heart is, and then music is just my platform for accessing people. And that just meant that began to tailor all the decisions that I was making in my life, to say, like, being a musician exclusively, this is going to be controversial, but is almost a little bit too self-centered for me and the way that I operate. Like, spending that much time working on myself day in and day out just didn't compute for me. And I like had to stop fighting it and just say, this is something I want to continue to be good at and grow myself, but with the purpose not of fame or notoriety, but with the idea that how can what I'm doing right now be in service of other people? And the teaching obviously like fit right in with that. And so we're teaching more and it's so rewarding, but I took a step back and went, okay, this is wonderful and this is really exciting, but the 95% of the students that we're working with are white. 95% of them are middle class, if not upper middle class, if not affluent. And they might not be. So our clinics are, I'll finish that sentence. They might not be the ones that need our message the most, basically. And they were getting a lot out of it. So our clinics are to help classical players learn to improvise and think a little bit more like pop musicians, and think about writing and creativity, because there's not a lot of creativity in the classical world. The extent is interpretation, you know. But when it comes to actually creating your own ideas and bringing sounds to life that you're not being told what to play, that's a novel concept. So spent some time really developing a system to make that comfortable for kids. And we do performances in schools and do presentations and stuff, but I'd say the meat of what we do is empowering students through harnessing their creativity and helping them look at their instrument differently, because that was so powerful for us. And it does end up being empowering outside of the classroom too, to encourage them to be vulnerable and offer these ideas, and then build them up and tell them how wonderful they are and that was their idea, and listen to what you just made on your instrument, and they walk out of the classroom feeling different. You know, again, music was just the platform for offering them this feeling of excitement and capability. And so I was watching it be really transformative for particular students, and it was never the ones like in the front row of the orchestra, the ones who have no problem with classical music, they can read the music no problem, they take private lessons. They were the ones that had the harder time improvising, but didn't need it. You know, they're happy where they are. They're thriving in the current system. But it's the kids kind of scattered in the back of the orchestra. I always joke about the blue-haired viola player, because violas, like I mentioned, are like kind of the quirky, slightly lower brother to the violin. And they're just known for being the weirdos. Like, they're the butt of all the jokes. And I always give some shout outs to my violas and assure them that I am a weirdo too, even though I'm kind of disguised as a violinist.
I thought accordion players were the butt of all jokes.
That's the Irish equivalent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just have to clear that up.
And banjos are the bluegrass equivalent. Just
okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, in the orchestral world, violas are like we just sit there and take it, and we're like, yeah, that's a pretty good one.
What about the triangle player? Like, is the triangle player not a little bit lower than the viola?
No, see, those are the percussionists. Yeah. They are like the cool kids. Mm-hmm, the drummers.
Triangle's kind of coming back into fashion too. There's recently an ad that's been made for, I think it's Doritos here, where they've released some new form of Dorito, and they're advertising it by making the triangle seem like the coolest thing to play. So like there's gonna be a whole influx of triangles appearing in pop records and everything from now on. I guarantee it.
Warren, we should start making triangles.
Add it to the list, Diana. Add it to the list.
Time. Yeah. We have the time.
We could do that while our new creative constipation drug is in clinical trials. We'd have a bit of downtime during that.
We could learn welding. We could learn to weld in like a week.
Easy.
It'd be fine.
Easy.
Yeah. So anyway, it's like the quirky kids in the back who are either troubled at home and have trouble like bringing their instrument to school, or can't read the music comfortably, or they know that they want to be there in music, but the classical world is just not working for them. And so we come in and offer them something different, and not an exaggeration, 9 times out of 10, the teacher will come up to us afterwards and say, that kid has not done a thing for me all year. They never bring their instrument. They can't play a single note. But they keep showing up, and but they were the first to volunteer. They've probably not said a single word out loud in the classroom, but they were the first to volunteer during our clinic because they were offered something that they could do better than everybody else. Because musically, their brains just operate differently, you know? Mm. And so anyways, that was so striking to me, and it was happening so consistently that I went, we need to go find where all those kids are. And it's not going to be in an affluent suburb of Columbus, Ohio, you know? And so that's where the nonprofit came from, was saying, I want to be able to reach those kids regardless of whether the schools can afford to have clinicians, because really it's a luxury. Not just a luxury in that you've got an administration that could potentially fund and have a budget for something like this, but it comes all the way down to sometimes we're paid by music boosters or the fundraisers, which means that there are parents that are available to host the fundraisers, and the kids have rides on Saturday to be dropped off to do the car wash fundraisers, you know? Like the having money available trickles all the way back down to home life and you know, when parents are working two jobs and the older sister is the one making dinner for the kids, they're not going to be able to show up for a fundraiser to raise a little bit of money to have a guest clinician come in. And so we just wanted to bypass the financial aspect altogether. So now we have schools get in touch with us and we're able to subsidize if they're not able to kind of front the full cost of what we do. But now when we are in a town, maybe for another reason, whether it's a show, we will actively seek out some of these schools that maybe are known for being in rougher areas or being underserved, which is what our nonprofit bylaws say, and say we'd love to come in free of charge and just offer your students a cool experience. And that's when this grew to completely different level in my life, feeling like it had that component. So
I think it's such an admirable project to have undertaken. And I do encourage anybody that's out there that's still listening this far into the podcast to go and check out the moxproject.org, because Diana is doing some really great work, and I've been lucky enough to do a little bit of work alongside her. And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do a little bit more work in the future alongside each other. I just think it's such a cool thing to be involved in, because, and I'm sure you can probably identify with this, like when I was growing up and when I first discovered music, I feel like music made me feel like more socially acceptable, where I felt like quite an awkward teenager. I felt like I was overweight. I felt like I was a bit weird, and I had all these strange feelings that I wanted to put into words. And it was weird that I even wanted to put them into words, but for some reason, the music made me feel like I had something to offer. And I think that's very true for a lot of people that work within the music industry, is that they often have felt like the outsider in their life. And it's the one thing that they cling to that they kind of makes them feel understood, or makes them feel like they can understand themselves better or something. Or maybe they just want to be the cool kid who, maybe the cool kids were all playing in the high school football team or soccer team, as we have soccer here. Maybe the cool kids were playing in the soccer team or playing rugby or playing ice hockey or whatever it was. And you wanted to be in that cool gang, but you didn't have that ability to offer, but yet you had this thing that was music, and that thing gave you a community that you could build around yourself and that would make you feel acceptable and make you feel like you had a social circle of people that you could hang out with and all that stuff. And I don't know what the situation's like in the US, but I know here they've kind of been cutting at the funding for the arts within schools, within the school system and within education. And to me, it's just such a sad thing to see, because there are so many kids who need to understand themselves better and who need to help the world around them understand themselves better. And for me, I know personally, and I know this is true for a lot of people that I've met, music is therapy. Like music is it's my way of figuring out how I feel, and it's my way of expressing to the world how I feel, even though I clearly like to talk. And I'm more than happy to be open about the way that I feel in other avenues. There is something very special about music in that it helps me to understand myself better. And I don't know where I would be if I didn't have the opportunities that I had in my younger years, like as a teenager, as my love for this was developing. If I didn't have some of the experiences, and I didn't have some of the people around me encouraging me to keep going and encouraging me that I had something to offer and to give, I don't know where I would be now. I don't even know if I would still be here, quite honestly. And so I think it's such a commendable thing that you've done to have set up an organization like this to look after, to give a voice to those kids and to help those kids, like to give them that opportunity, to give them the opportunity to fall in love with something that they maybe felt like they were falling in love with, and it's just nudged them that little bit further. Or maybe they didn't have a clue that they were going to fall in love with it, and they just have. And I think that's so special, and it's such an important thing to give back. And I think at the heart of most artists that I've met, there definitely is that feeling of service or that underlying desire to serve other people. That's why a lot of people want to share their stories, and that's why they want to reach a lot of people. But as you say, it can be very difficult to detach that from the desire for fame or success, or to let that message get skewed in some way in order to reach the masses. I think is a very difficult thing for people often to navigate, and to not lose themselves within that side of the industry, which really strives for making money and strives for fame and all of that stuff. Uh, and I think that it's really cool that you've landed upon that thing for yourself personally, that you've realized that the magic is not always in serving yourself, but it's actually in serving others. And I think that's a really awesome thing. Um,
You and I have always identified on that, and um, like you said, I got chills thinking just hearing you tell your story about music being kind of what saved you in a lot of ways. And yeah, I don't think you're alone in that. And um, that yeah, that's the point. That's the goal. And a lot of times, um, especially if it's a school where they might not even have a music program, but at least we can be the illustration of what it is to know that there's something that makes you unique that you could do all day every day and totally immerse yourself in and never get sick of. Like what I tell my students, like, find a career doing what you would be doing anyway, whether it's cooking or gaming or listening to your friends' problems, you know, maybe, or being really funny. Like, what is it that just comes effortlessly to you? And for us, it was music, and I love being able to stand up there as the illustration of finding my thing and rolling with it. But we encourage them to it really could be anything, and especially this day and age, everybody needs that, like you said, that smaller community within the larger community, and that's definitely the music room for the music kids. Yeah. And yeah, I what you said just at the end there reminded me of when you're on. It's For me, I had to figure out where I was receiving as much energy as I was giving, and I there were times where I would be on stage feeling like I had just given and given and given to this audience, and I hadn't really received a whole lot back. And you get back into your hotel room and you just crash and you feel just completely just like emptied, you know? And you are serving them, and it is rewarding for that reason. But when, for me, I just had to figure out that that energy expenditure became a cycle, and that I would be teaching, you know, 4 or 5 workshops throughout the day, then doing a concert with this group of kids in the evening. And I would go to bed totally energized and wake up ready to go the next day, because I was being given so much, but in addition to what I was giving. And that, when you find that cycle of energy, I mean, it's self-perpetuating. You can do a lifetime of that. And I was just kind of noticing where I felt totally drained and just kind of like depleted. And it was when there was so much focus, yeah, on myself, and just and being driven for more self-focused reasons, and when it was just purely music um and creating an experience for people. I can't say that because I do still really love that, but yeah, I just figured out where I was really being fulfilled and where I wasn't. And I think it's hard. I was reluctant to let go of the fact that I was a musician first, because I very much consider myself a musician, but I have to be careful not to compare myself to people who literally spend hours and hours and hours every day transcribing solos and working on their fiddle playing, because I've had to acknowledge that just being a fiddle player is not going to be enough to keep that cycle of energy going for me. So that was my reminder to myself too. It's really hard.
I'm going to round up the conversation with this question. I think it's a
Okay.
good way to kind of leave it off. I was going to ask what's next for you. That was my final question. I'm not going to ask that question now, because you've already kind of referred to the fact that you kind of feel somewhat
No
in
freaking clue.
you feel somewhat in limbo at the minute, and that's okay. It's fine to feel that way. And I think that you're going to land upon that thing, that direction that you're supposed to take at some point soon. And so I thought I would rephrase that question in light of what we've just been talking about. So, and this is kind of a more of a philosophical way of rounding this whole thing off.
Love it.
essentially what we're talking about there in the performance side of things versus the education side of things. We're talking about how sometimes the performance side of things and being an artist can feel quite self-serving and feel maybe quite egotistical in some ways, compared to the educational side of things, which oftentimes feels like we're serving other people. And you're saying that that can be a very fulfilling and rewarding perpetual cycle that just keeps filling you up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like if you were to sacrifice yourself for the service of others, that you would be able to give yourself in the same way as if you have the balance of both serving yourself and serving others?
Hmm. Oh man, that's a great question, Warren. I guess I don't know for sure, but um,
And of course, what I mean by that is by maintaining not only the path of being an educator and running a
mhm.
nonprofit organization, but also pursuing the path of being an artist and sitting down,
Yeah.
creating, allowing your art, your artistry to unfold and create new sounds and take your musical experience in new avenues that maybe education won't necessarily push you in.
Yeah. Yeah. The answer is no. I need to have both, 100%. And it's because I am a creative, and because I consistently am having ideas, and as an introvert, if you would believe it, my time in my own space, and that's where I am. That's where I recharge, and that's where I mean, there is so much healing to be done in creating, and it's a huge part of my process. I could never not have that. And also, don't let me sound like some like saint with like me just giving my heart constantly. Like fame would be awesome, and I love being on stage because I've always loved having attention, and I love being the center of attention, and I love knowing that my voice could somehow be impacting other people, and I feel comfortable doing that. So this is it's my life is not selfless by any means, um, but I know that the two feed each other well, especially in my life. So the more musical credibility I have, the more I can speak as an illustration to these students of what's possible. And the more I make the music that I'm passionate about, often it's a little more mainstream and current, and it accesses the students a little bit better, a little bit differently. And vice versa, the educational component fills me up and fills my heart up. It also adds to the financial aspect of my life, which then allows me a little bit more creative freedom to continue the artist side of things. So the two work in tandem, and if I can just find a balance that I feel like is feels like I'm getting what I need both creatively and emotionally, and in terms of like the service element, because as it stands right now, given everything we've talked about, education I think we're on this side with education. Education is almost a little bit too at the forefront for me right now because it's what we can do virtually. So I'm doing virtual clinics most weeks and doing some master classes and online courses and that kind of thing. But as we've talked about, I'm really craving that personal musical advancement right now too. So I'm eager to get back out on the road and kind of have those level out a little bit. But and again, I can't compare myself to the brilliant educators, and I can't compare myself to the full-time, completely obsessed fiddle players, because I have to find that equilibrium in my life to be in the sweet spot.
Yeah, I feel like that direction is probably not that far away. Figuring all of that out probably isn't that far away from you. I think that you'll probably realize in time that this downtime has been a very beneficial thing for you, as I think I've come to realize. And I think a lot of people, I hope that a lot of people out there, creative people, will have that same realization that it'll help them to reevaluate the way that they move forward with their careers and the way that they approach their careers from here on in, that it puts things into perspective for them, that it puts life into perspective and the things that matter most in life into perspective and help them in making those decisions moving forward. Uh, I'm really excited to see how your career unfolds from here on in. I know that you've got great things that lie ahead of you. I'm so grateful for you sitting down and taking the time to talk with me. It's been such a pleasure chatting to you. I love hearing about your experiences and all of your insights into things. You've just got such a creative mind that just goes off in so many different tangents, and you're just always such a fascinating and inspiring person to talk to. Thanks for taking
Warren,
the
who
time to
are
sit
you?
down.
Oh, thank you. The feeling is totally mutual. I enjoy our conversations so much, and I always look forward to them. So I am honored that you would ask and felt like I had something to contribute. So thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you involved, and I'm sure that
Ah,
anybody that's been listening in has thoroughly enjoyed everything that you've had to say. For anybody that is still watching, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to sit and listen to Diana's crazy life and all the things that she's gotten up to, all of her crazy thoughts that go through her head, all of the crazy thoughts that go through mine. Uh, Thanks for tuning in to me and all my friends. I'll see you again soon for another random episode with another random friend. Thanks, guys.